All right, Olivia Parkes, welcome to the Rest of Us podcast.
Thanks for having me, Noah.
Glad to have you on. I'm really excited to talk to you. It's a little bit of a different, business and story than we've had before, so I'm really excited to kind of hear it. But before we get started, I'll just have you introduce yourself and what your business is and what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Olivia. I do fractional COO and operations consulting. And so what that really kind of means in like more normal language is like when entrepreneurs, they're growing, they're scaling, they're usually quite visionary, have a ton of ideas, and they're working way too much, and the business is not necessarily growing. So I'm really the person that comes in, helps them streamline and systemize everything so the CEO can be in their zone of genius doing what they do best, whether that's marketing, sales, high level relationships, and help them scale more predictably by helping them grow out their team and their systems.
Definitely, yeah. I can definitely relate to the person growing their business, and the whole operations side is very complicated and hard to build out. So, I love what you do, but let's just kind of jump right into your story, how you got started in business, and kind of where the entrepreneurship side of your life kind of got started.
Yeah, so when I was in university, I decided to start a couple of businesses. I started like an Amazon FBA e-commerce thing. Didn't go well. Still have units of products at my house back in the UK from that. I started a Facebook ads agency, and I couldn't get any clients. Like I wasn't good at sales at the time, and like I started a business in the first place because I was kind of like I was doing a science degree, and I was just like, this is not really where I want to go with my life. Like, I don't just want to be in a research lab, or I could have become an investment banker. I was like, I don't want to do that, work for a decade, maybe end up making the money I want after I've sold my soul to the corporate world. So I started these businesses, but, like I said, couldn't get any clients. I was cold calling potential clients in between my lectures while I was at uni, and I couldn't figure it out. So I had a friend who was really good at sales at the time. So I called them up and I'm like, yo, who taught you sales? Because I need to know. And it turned out to be this guy who lived in San Diego, and I was living in the UK at the time, but he did like online stuff. So I used my student loan to pay him to coach me to be good at sales. And I ended up getting pretty good. I could, close clients now. And so he asked me if I wanted to become a sales rep for his business, virtually, of course, because I'm still in the
Hmm.
UK, still doing my university degree. So I did that, and it worked out quite well with the time difference because I would just do uni in the day and then I'd work with him at night. And so I
Yeah.
did that, and I helped him with his sales. He had a sales training and recruiting company. So, yeah, but I realized like he was not good at operations at all. Like he had been a sales rep for over a decade, and he was very visionary, a million ideas, like was great at sales and great at like motivating the team. But once the client came in, like he could train them. Like when he was on a call with them, he was great at training them. But all that in between the call stuff, it just kind of went out the window, and it turned into a bit of a mess. So to me, it just felt like common sense because, like, I do have quite a systems brain and like just seeing what needs to be done. So I just kind of stepped in, taught myself through necessity, using the resources on YouTube, Google, whatever, but also
Hmm.
my network and stuff. And so I managed to help him streamline his operations, build out his team, automate things, and I helped him double his business in a year, and I became his COO. And then I went out to San Diego to work with him a bit, and he moved to Miami. I worked there for a little bit, and then I was like, you know what, I don't really align with this relationship anymore. So I want to actually go and do my own thing.
Hmm.
So that's when I started my own operations business consulting agency, and I was still I was back in the UK now waiting for my visa, and then I got my visa, moved to Chicago, and now I've been here for a year. So that's kind of the story.
Yeah, lots to unpack there. I kind of want to go back all the way back to college real quick. When you started those businesses, did you have any entrepreneurial background or people in your family, or was it kind of just a side hustle to make extra money? What was kind of the motivating factor for starting businesses in the future, in the first place?
Yeah, well, my stepdad is an entrepreneur, so that was kind of around. I kind of always had this like long-term idea that I would start a business.
Hmm.
And then I just was kind of like, well, why not just do it now?
Yeah.
Like it was around the time where there were more young entrepreneurs on the internet. Like I was seeing people like me doing things, and I was like, why not just do it now? Like, why put yourself through all of this trouble of like not making the kind of money you want to make, not doing the type of things you want to do for like 5 or 10 years when you could just do it now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that in the sense of like I always, especially at the end of college, I was like, well, I'll start my business eventually. Like I'll go in a 9 to 5 and then I'll do it eventually. I'll once I have the clients, I'll go full time or whatever. But I think that that's kind of a backwards way of thinking it, especially if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to have that drive, that want to do it. And so if you have that, or if you want to do that, then there is really no excuse to start it now. And you can always, work a second job or work a full-time job and do it as a side hustle until you make the income, but there's no reason not to start it now because you won't learn anything and make the early mistakes until you actually start doing it. And that's really important, especially as you get older and you get further into your business. You don't want to be making those mistakes at a later age or a later like part in your business. You want to make them early when you're in college, when you're in high school, whenever, to just get them out of the way so you know exactly what you want to be doing. And then when you're, at the age where you want to start a family, you want to buy a house, you want to travel, you want to do this or that, you've already made those mistakes and you've got to a point where your business is in a good place to where you can have all those things that you want.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so important as well because I think something that puts people off starting a business is they're like, oh, I don't know the first thing about running a business. I don't have the skills to run a business. Like maybe
Yeah.
they just have one skill that they plan to monetize, but all of the other business stuff they don't know anything about. And so they let that put them off. But it's like, you can go to school for business, you can read a bunch of books, you can like talk to other people, you can go get a normal job, but you're never going to really know how to do those things until you start your own business. And so you're just kind of delaying the inevitable. And I
Yeah.
also think that if you do work in an organization for like 5 or 10 years and then start your business, you've kind of just been programmed to run your business the way that they ran their business. And so you'll like
Hmm.
take all of their good and bad habits into your business instead of kind of starting with no like starting point, and so
Yeah.
just kind of going off your intuition, going on what works best. And like when I first started my business, I was reading so many books about like entrepreneurs that had kind of just done a similar thing to me, like coming out of uni, made their business type of thing. And they all like learnt sales first. I noticed that that was like a big thing, which is why I was kind of like, okay, I have to learn this. But the second thing is like a lot of them, they didn't go like work in an organization, like a big corporate one for like 5 or 10 years. They learned sales somehow, like they had a job just as a sales rep for a bit, and then they started their business. And because of that, like those were like the most innovative businesses. So I wouldn't let like lack of experience or things like
Yeah.
that put you off because like it really is a myth.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think to kind of add on to that, like I've kind of realized, especially just in adulthood in general and in the business world, like nobody really knows what they're doing in a sense. Like they're all kind of making up as you go. Like you look up like how do I even accounting, like there is a format of accounting, but you can do it so many different ways. You can use so many different softwares. You can write contracts different ways. You can do all these things different ways. So there really is no like instruction manual for starting your business. Nobody really has like it all figured out. They're all figuring it out as they go. Like one thing that I've learned, especially with, I think for me, it's been pricing is the biggest thing that has changed so much. Is like everybody has a different pricing structure and everybody has a different way of accounting for it and charging their customers and billing their customers. And when I want to offer a new product or offer a new way of payment or a way of billing my customer, like one thing I'm looking at right now is cost sharing for builders and architects, because sometimes the builder wants to pay a little bit and the architect wants to pay a little bit and then the owner of the building wants to pay a little bit. That's a whole new price structure that I've never explored before. And so now I have to learn how to do that. And I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning. I didn't know how to price my photography in the beginning. So nobody really knows what they're doing in the beginning. They might know the sales aspect of it, like you said, or they might be a lawyer and they know the legal aspects of it, whatever it is. But they're figuring out everything else, the operation side of it, the supply side of it, supply chain side of it. So I think, yeah, like you said, it's really important to take that first step, do what you know best, but then read books, look for mentors, hire out certain areas that you are not strong in. Like for me, accounting was that thing. I hired an accountant as the first thing I did in my business really was I hire an accountant, and it was the best decision I made because that's not something I want to focus on, nor do I want to learn. I want to text or email my accountant and be like, hey, I just sold this item. Can you make sure it went through all right in QuickBooks? And like that's it. So when you start a business, focus on what you are strong at, learn the other things, and then hire out the other things if you're in a position to do that, because nobody's really expecting you to know everything, and it's not really realistic to do that in the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I have a lot to say about that. I think it's like, not everything has to be a strength. Like learn a
Yeah.
bit of everything so like it's not a major weakness, but you only really need to round it out and then focus on the other things. But a huge thing for me is like when I did go out to San Diego and like I started working with this company, like it was like seeing behind the curtain because the guy that I worked with, he lived with a bunch of other really successful entrepreneurs. And then he was like big relationships guy, would always like he was really into joint ventures. So we would end up getting on calls with other like pretty big names in like the coaching industry. And so I'd be on a call with like the founder and like their people. And I just remember thinking, like, when you see this company online, you think that they're so good, like they have everything. But when you
Yeah.
like see behind the scenes, you're like, oh, like it's a shit show here too, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's like I think I wish more people knew that because I think they think everyone is light years ahead of them, but they're really not. Like some of them don't even have good systems or anything, but they just got there because they just moved and did the thing and they didn't overthink it,
Yep.
and someone that I spoke to when I was in San Diego, like one of this guy's friends, he worked in corporate and then he went from like, he started his business, literally he was making no money in the beginning and now he's making like 500K a month. And I was like, what really changed for you? And he was like, well, eventually I just spent so much time around these guys that were doing better than me. And I realized like they were no different than me. Like
Hmm.
they weren't smart, they weren't special, they weren't like I was putting them on a pedestal before, and I thought I had to be this like godlike human to achieve this success. But then I realized they were like just like me, or I had skills that were better than theirs, and so there was no reason why I couldn't do it. And
Hmm.
then that's when like things started to change for him. So
Yeah.
I think we just
I
get in our
remember.
way too much.
Oh, absolutely. I remember I was listening to an interview with Sam Parr, and when he was starting HustleCon, which was his kind of convention for CEOs and entrepreneurs and things like that, he was in like the green room with all the CEOs that were going to speak, and he was hearing them talk about all these issues that he was facing too, like hiring and firing and managing and delegating, all these things. And these are like big time CEOs, like cover of Forbes, just got funding, this and that, and like all these big things that you kind of you look at them and you're like, oh, they have it all figured out. They just got $100 million round of funding, or they just got on the cover of Forbes, or they just had a profile written about them. All these type of things, and you hear them saying like, I'm scared to fire this person, or I'm scared to make that jump and hire this next role, and things like that. And you kind of realize that you're kind of all in the same boat. You might be at different levels financially, or just in general, you might be at different levels of your career, but you're all doing the same thing at one level or another. And the other thing I like what you said about that was he put himself in kind of an environment of growth and of kind of entrepreneurship and that mindset, because I think one thing that I'm learning about a lot of myself is I need to be surrounded by people that have that growth mindset and that will encourage me and push me to be better in my business, as opposed to being around people that are like, why don't you get a real job? Or, why don't you work a 9 to 5? Or you can't do that, or that's not worth that much. You need to be around people that say like, hey, that your time is worth that. You're really creative, you're doing great work, you need to keep pushing. Like when I talk to those people, I feel really encouraged, and then when I put myself in environments where people are discouraging to me, I get really down in my business and I feel like my business suffers. So I think it is really important, like you said, to put yourself in an environment physically and just with the people that you interact with that will encourage you, because it has a direct translation on your success of your business and also your mental health and your physical health, even to some extent personally. So yeah, putting yourself in that environment really will help or change the trajectory of your personal life and business life.
Yeah, exactly. Because like this is just a mental game.
Yeah,
Like it really is. So I like that.
absolutely. So, I kind of want to talk about what you're doing now with your company and the things you do. So, kind of talk more about the idea of a fractional COO and what that looks like on a day to day basis, and kind of what services you're offering to people, and we can kind of dive deeper into that as we go along.
Yeah, so I mean, a fractional COO, it's kind of for a company that they don't need a fully fledged COO yet. Like they're
Mm-hmm.
not big enough, so they're usually between the like 500K and like 10 million a year mark. That's where these kind of businesses fall. So
Mm-hmm.
they don't really need someone full time as a COO, but they probably, if they're on the upper limit of that range, they definitely need like an operations manager. So that's someone that I would be working with in order to like implement the things I'm doing. So what usually when I'm working with a client like this, the first thing I do is like audit their entire business. So everything, marketing, sales, operations, fulfillment, finances, their team, what they're compensating their team, all of their KPIs, like going through financial statements, and I'll ask like the CEO how they're spending their time, like about their zone of genius, all of that. And then the goal is to kind of pick out like all of the major issues in the company right now. And, I also go through their goals and their vision and stuff. So I'm like, okay, what's blocking you from getting where you want to go? Like a lot of it is like revealing blind spots to the business owner and kind
Mm-hmm.
of, things they didn't know that is hindering their success. And then, me identifying like, okay, what systems do we need to put in place? Who do we need to hire? Where do we need to like redistribute cash? In some cases, it's like, okay, you're doing well right now, but like, okay, in future we want to increase the profit. So these are some profit lines and new offers we might want to create as part of that. Right. So I'm kind of picking out all of the issues, creating a list, and then from there I create a series of projects that we're going to implement in order to, improve everything. So that is kind of a step by step thing. So the first project will be like the highest priority thing. With a lot of people, it ends up being having to like rework the structure of their team, giving everyone clear KPIs, clear roles and responsibilities. And sometimes you have to let people go, you have to hire new people, but really like, how can we deploy the people they have right now to the best of their ability? Because most
Mm-hmm.
companies I go into is like they don't have any KPIs. The people on the team don't know like what success looks like in their role. It's very ambiguous. They don't have like a clear system to follow to get a result, and then the business owner is like annoyed that they're not getting the
Yeah.
result, and I'm like, well, you didn't give them a system to follow and a KPI. So you know so usually that's the first thing I focus on, because it's like, yeah, you're probably lacking systems in other areas, but we should make the best use of your current resources, and your greatest resource is your team members. So we're going to always deploy them best first. And then, next things would be like, okay, maybe your fulfillment is very manual. You don't even have like a project management system of how you're managing your clients. So I'll go in and like automate all of their onboarding and like create a project management system and create all the SOPs involved with that. And so it's like a series of projects like that until we've kind of done everything. At that point, it's like, okay, do we want to part ways right now, or do we want to like continue a next level of optimization, which would be,
Mm-hmm.
stuff I mentioned, like creating new offers, like how are we going to scale in this next level, right? Because the thing is, it's like, there's this thing called the 3x rule, and it's like your systems are probably going to need rebuilding for every time your revenue triples, your client base triples, or your team triples. So it's like, we build these things now. It's not like everything's going to last forever. It's going to
Yeah.
probably last you like years, but you are going to need to adapt as you keep scaling, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make
A lot
sense?
to yeah, definitely a lot to unpack there. So when you're I guess my first like kind of interest in that is when you go to a company and you do an audit, and let's say you have a pretty harsh audit of them, like you go in and you be like, you have no systems in place, you have no KPIs, you have no this, you find all these issues. What is their general reaction when they see all that? Are they encouraged to like work with you more? Are they kind of defensive? Because I know some CEOs can be very protective of their business. and kind of the systems they thought they had in place. So what is that kind of reaction, and how have you navigated that to make it a very valuable like time to work with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think most of them aren't really defensive because I pre-frame like what it's going to be before we do it, right? So I tell them like I am going to be picking out issues in your business and things like that. And it's like most people that hire me is like they know it's not perfect. They
Mm-hmm.
know that they've got issues, and so they're open to resolving them. And it's like if people are defensive, it's like it rarely ever happens, but I always, when I pick out an issue, it's not like I'm just like going through a list and being like, oh, your business is trash. It's like I'm explaining the wider context of like why this is an issue. So they actually
Mm-hmm.
understand the impact that it's going to have. And when they see that and it makes sense to them, then they're always, keen to solve it. Because at the end of the day, it's like successful business owners, they know how to put their ego aside, take on the
Mm-hmm.
feedback, and they want to make changes. And so if they can't do that, it doesn't really show me that they're going to be the best client to work with and
Yep.
that they're even going to make it long term. Because to me, like business is also personal development. So you have to have a
Mm-hmm.
level of like self awareness and personal development.
Absolutely. And you brought up a good point about being like the best client to work with versus not. So have there been how is that kind of journey of like finding good clients to work with gone for you? Because like for me, in the beginning of my business, and I'm still struggling with this a little bit, but I'm getting a lot better of like I will work with anybody, do anything, like especially in photography, like I'll do any type of photography just to get, my business going. And then I got to a point where I recognized like, oh, that's not a great relationship to have with a client. I should fire that client or I should move on from that client. So for you, what was that kind of journey like, and how have you navigated finding good clients to work with and recognizing when it's not a good partnership?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like right off the get-go, you know that they're going to be, or like there's an increased chance they're going to be a good client if like they don't really battle with you on price. Like if they just take that in their stride and they understand that that's what it is, then you're usually going to have less issues. Usually it's the
Mm-hmm.
people that go back and forth on price but then end up like agreeing to it. Those ones are usually more difficult.
Yep.
Um, and then something I noticed as well is like, because for me, there's kind of like two types of people that I mainly get. It's like the people that really don't have that many systems and like we really do need to build a lot of things. But then there's the people that have a decent amount built out, but they're just looking to know what they don't know. Now, those
Mm-hmm.
people are the ones I tend to get more pushback on, or they're like already doing things their way. And so they kind of like
Yep.
don't want to do it my way. And so with them, I kind of realize it's just better to do an audit and kind of let them run with it because they just want the inside. They want to know what they don't know, but they just want to do it their way. Like once they know what I recommend, they could just kind of want to take it and run with
Mm-hmm.
it. So I noticed that because I think that um, it can just be challenging with those types of people. And I'd prefer to work with someone that doesn't kind of have any like preconceived ideas of everything and like they're willing to just like take my lead and let me kind of run with it. It ends up slowing things down when they're just kind of, you know, that's the thing as well. It's like it's fine to already have things built out, but if you're going to hire me, it's like let me implement the things that we've agreed on instead of like
Yeah.
sometimes they'll go and like implement it themselves and then I'm like, well, I was going to implement that and then it's just
Yeah.
like a whole thing. So it really they need to be able to let go of control. I think that's something I notice is like if they can't let go of control and if I notice in the sales call and things like issues they're having with their team, like are they quite controlling, are they kind of trying to control everything? If so, it's probably going to be like a more difficult client to work with. And
Definitely.
also someone I know like difficult clients to work with is like on the sales call if they are like going really off tangent and they're kind of making it about things that isn't even like what you do, like they they can seem really nice, like they're good people, but like they want to talk about everything else and almost turn it into a friendship like right off the bat. those
Hmm.
people usually make the relationship more personal than business, and
Yep.
it can be difficult because you're trying to like actually do business things, and it can just be a
Hmm.
challenge. So that's something I noticed as well.
Definitely. And I think you brought up a good point about kind of them trusting you to make the changes that you're recommending. And I think that kind of gets to the point of when you're running a business, especially as a if you're a founder or COO, you want to be hired as the expert of that of the thing you're doing, whether it's marketing, operations, sales, creative, whatever you're doing, you're trying to position yourself. You should be positioning yourself and being hired as the expert. And what comes with that is people trusting your expertise. So when people push back on you on the ideas, that part of that is just them not being a great fit for you, but also part of that may be you not positioning yourself. And I'm not saying this for you. I'm just saying more in general, like you not positioning yourself as as an expert in your business. And I've struggled with that too. Of when I go on a set or when I go on a shoot or whatever, I need to walk in there and kind of almost take control and kind of run the room and kind of set the expectations for that day, and kind of position myself as the expert. And I think where a lot of entrepreneurs may struggle is that they don't set themselves up as the expert, and so they kind of get pushed around a little bit, or they're not as confident in what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, I think that is a big thing. And it's like, even I think another part of that as well is like if you position yourself as an expert, you believe it, you have confidence in yourself, even when you get the pushback, you're not going to just cave and be like, oh,
Yep.
okay. Like you're going to stand your ground and be like, this is why I think this is the best fit for you. Like, by no means do you have to do this, but this is what I'm recommending and why I'm recommending it. Up to you if you want to follow my advice or not. Right. And so
Yeah.
it's like, that's kind of what I do at the end of the day. Is like I can't control whether people want to follow my advice or not, but I know like what I'm saying is, go, gonna probably work for them. I've
Yeah.
been around the block long enough, so
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is like people, they're kind of too quick to doubt themselves when the truth of the matter is it's like you have a lot more experience in your area than the founder that's working with you or whoever is
Hmm.
working with you. They only know, like, let's say operations or marketing, like they only know that in the context of their business the majority of the time. And so
Hmm.
they know like what's worked for them, and they've almost become attached to what works for them, like especially if they're already making like seven figures, like 5 million a year, 10 million a year. Like they're like, oh well, it's got me here, I'm attached to it, and they're like
Hmm.
scared of doing something different because they feel like this worked for them. But at the same time, like nothing changes if nothing changes. Just because you've done that, got you to this level, doesn't mean it's going to get you to the next level. And that's often the case with operational stuff. It's like you can get to 1 million a year off pretty poor operations, but to get to 10 million a year, you can't really. So
Hmm.
I think that's as well, like usually the people that are more around 1 million with like a big ego, they can be harder to change because they
Hmm.
really like have bought into what they've been doing so far. And so
Yeah.
even though you're here with all of this experience and telling them, showing them a better way, they have this fear and they become attached to it. So I think it's also important to note that. And it's like if you do want to try and get them to change their mind, you have to address that and be like, look, I understand that this has got you here and blah blah blah. Basically what I just said, say it to them. Like a big piece of advice I got from a mentor like 6 months ago. She was like, this stuff you say to me about the clients and like why they, need to do certain things, like just say it to them. Like be
Hmm.
completely unfiltered. Whatever you would say after the call when you're on the phone to your friend, say it to the client because I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, if it's not like, oh, they're a bitch, like don't
Yeah.
say
Don't say
that.
that.
But like harsh truths that sometimes we think that we don't want to say it. Most of
Yeah.
the time, like that will actually swing things in your favor because most people can't have those kind of direct conversations. And if you're ever going to get someone to show up in the way that you want them to, you need to have those direct conversations.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think is really important to balance, is I found when I work with a lot of real estate agents and builders and architects and things like that, and I have just being in the industry and being around them, I have learned a lot about real estate enough to talk to them about it. Of like, contingencies and the market and this price and whether the showings will sell and all this kind of stuff. But there's a point where I will never give them advice to run their business. Obviously, like I will never tell them how to sell a house or tell a buyer how to buy a house. Like I that's where I stop. And so I think it's important to be conversational with them and kind of understand their industry, because I'm sure you work in a lot of different industries and you can maybe talk a little bit about those industries, but there's a point where my advice on the photography of the house or the photography or the video is where I'm going to be actually giving advice, but I'll talk to you about kind of your real estate business or whatever. So I think it's important to balance being knowledgeable in the industry and also um, running your business and understanding what you need to be successful and what your advice means to them and how to communicate that well, because that's something where I think I'm like right on the line of like too much into the real estate kind of knowledge and not enough into the photography kind of knowledge. So I think there's a line to balance there.
Yeah, it's good to know like where your skill set ends and
Mm-hmm.
begins, and be able to speak to that. And like you said, it's like, um, in some areas you can speak about it, but sometimes it's like if I know I'm not that knowledgeable in there, I just have like a few things I can say and be like, look, you probably want to talk to someone else about this. This is what I
Yeah.
know, but you might be the one to make a better decision than me on this. So I think
Yeah.
that's really important. It's like there's no shame in like admitting what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You'll actually get more respect and get yourself in less awkward and uncomfortable
Yep.
situations. So,
Definitely. Yeah. There's been times where I've gotten like too close to that line and I'm starting to like talk about like real estate and I'll say something that's just completely wrong, like about the market and like why it's harder to buy a house or sell a house or this or that and like inventory's down and all this kind of stuff. And they'll be like, no, that's actually not correct. And so I'm like, oh, this is awkward now. So yeah, there's definitely a line to balance there. Um, with the last kind of 10-15 minutes of this conversation, I want to talk about kind of some of the biggest things that you see in your work operationally that people struggle with and the easiest changes people can make to incorporate into their business to get better operationally. So some of the biggest things that you see when you go into an audit that people are making mistakes like constantly throughout your work?
yeah, that's a good question. I just say one of the big things is like lack of documentation. Like they haven't really sat down and thought about the processes in their business. It's kind of all living in their head or some of their team members' heads. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're not really able to get like a predictable output from a certain input. So I would sit down and like think about all the tasks that happen like in your sales process, in your marketing process, in your fulfillment process, right? And think of it as a system. Like marketing is taking a stranger and turning them into a lead. Like what is everything that needs to happen there? How can you document this into a process that can actually be used by someone else, like a stranger? I think this is another thing as well, is like people that do have some documentation of processes. I read them and it's just like so confusing. I'm like, you couldn't just bring on a team member and have them read this document
Mm-hmm.
and know what to do. It's too confusing. So I think that's another thing as well. Like keep it simple, screen record yourself doing the thing, like use a
Yep.
loom and like put that in as well. So yeah, do that for all the processes. Like marketing is stranger to a lead, sales is lead to a client, fulfillment is, new client to happy serviced client, right? So think of everything that needs to happen, document it, and from there it's going to become easier for you to see like where the technology fits in with that, where do the automations fit in with that. It's like some people don't even know like where to start with the automation kind of thing. So there's that. But I'd say like another big thing is like most people just don't have the time, like the
Mm-hmm.
CEOs, entrepreneurs. It's like they don't even have the time to worry about like automating their business to a certain degree. Like there's some people that do it more than others, like the CEOs that are kind of like visionary and integrator, like they kind of have both. Like they will automate a lot by themselves, but the ones that are just visionary, they won't. And it's like they just have resistance to it, they don't like it, they get confused about it. And so it's like if that's you, don't try and like force yourself to do it, just hire someone to do
Mm-hmm.
it for you. Like still do the thing of like mapping out your systems, but um then when you want someone to help automate things, it's going to be so much easier for them to do it. Right. So that's another
Yeah.
thing. I'd say another big thing is like people are so unaware about the profitability of their services and their overall finances. Like they just spending money willy nilly and they don't know where it's going and they're not like actually deploying it in a way that's going to get them a result. A lot of people compensate their team just from like a number that they pulled out of their head
Yeah.
instead of like actually doing the research of what is the going rate for this role right now. And they don't really bonus their team in regards to a KPI, right? So again, it comes back to if you don't have the system and know the input and the output, you can't really bonus someone on like hitting the KPI of the output. So you need to have that. And because if you do that and people are hitting the KPIs and the bonus for it, your business is going to actually become more profitable. You should always design your bonuses to make you more profitable. And it's better for your team because, like, psychologically, they are more happy when they feel like they're achieving something and they're like
Mm-hmm.
meeting a result. And so, if they don't have that kind of metric, it's actually really hard for them to feel fulfilled and they're actually making a contribution to an organization. So, yeah. And I think everyone should work out like the gross and net profitability of their service. Like, one of my clients before we started working together and I was doing this for all of her services. I built this kind of financial model thing, but you can do it pretty simply. It's like the price of your service in a spreadsheet and then all the hours involved in fulfilling for that service and any other costs involved. And then you need to work out, okay, for these hours, like what's the hourly rate, basically working out the gross margin, right? And so one of my clients, she kind of just basically made up her pricing. When we
Yep.
did the gross margins, like they were going to work out as like 30% before she'd even hired someone because we were looking at hiring someone to take over the fulfillment of the service. And the gross margins were going to work out at 30%. And I was like, well, this is not going to be very profitable for you because your net is going to be even it's like 10%,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really not good. So we were able to restructure things and increase the pricing because again, it's like her service was worth it, but she was just like undervaluing herself as
Yep.
well. And it's like it's so easy as well when you're going from that transition of like you're the one fulfilling everything to someone else is fulfilling it. It's very easy to just like when you're fulfilling it, just pick any old pricing and think, oh, I'm happy, like I'm keeping most of that. Or you think you're keeping most of that, but actually it's
Yep.
going on like subscriptions and like random costs and other things.
Yep.
It's like you need to know your gross and net profit because like if we scaled out that service, she wouldn't have been profitable, but she wouldn't have even known it if we hadn't done that exercise. So it's like a pretty simple thing, but it's really important. And like keep going through your expenses. Like every month, go through your expenses. What are you using? What are you not using? Get rid of it. It's like most people, I can save them like 5 figures off the bat just from like rearranging their expenses and the compensation with the bonuses and stuff like that. It's honestly it's crazy, but it's like most people have we have a pretty avoidant relationship to money. And so I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to like sort out your relationship with money. Like you can't just
Yep.
avoid it and hope everything's going to be okay.
Yep. There's a lot there. I started writing things down because I was like, I'm gonna forget everything that I want to mention. But I think the documentation one is huge. Honestly, I would when I was working at my last internship before I went full time in my business, I was kind of getting ready to transition a lot of the work that I did over to other employees or new hires or things like that. And I was editing a podcast was the kind of the example I'll give here. I was editing a podcast for them, and we were going to transition me out of that role and then give it to somebody on staff, and they're like, okay, just create a guide to how you edit the podcast, how you go from recording to posting. And I'm like, oh yeah, easy. I'll just write it down. And when I started writing it down, I was like, oh, this is way more involved than I thought it would be because I just know every button to click. I know like my process. I know, where I keep the numbers that I need for like where I position stuff for graphics and things like that. I know all this just in my head. I know that it's 100 pixels this way or 1,000 pixels this way. I know all that. And when I was writing that down, I was like, oh, this is a lot more involved. And then when I gave that guide to the guy that I was transitioning it to, he just looked at it and he's like, I don't know how to do any of this. Like, even with the guide, I couldn't do any of this. So I think it is really, really important to not just document everything that you do, because that's really important, but give it to somebody and say, hey, recreate what I just did here. Because if they can't recreate it, you can't expect anybody else to recreate it. And so I think that's really important. And like you said, like video recordings and screen recordings are actually even better in that scenario, because you can actually visually show them what to do. So I think in my case, I should have just done a screen recording of how I actually edited that. Um, the next thing you talked about, and this is actually one of my questions that I was going to follow up with, is when to hire. And I think you kind of gave it or talked about it really well, of like, if you don't have time to do this, like I find this issue all the time. I don't have time to set up these systems. So it is worth your time and money to hire somebody like you, or hire a part-time person or whatever it is to create those systems and to run your systems, um, to get there, because it's not, you can't just slow down in your business. You can't just put off work for 6 months to create your automations. Like, that's not feasible in any way. So it is important to recognize when to hire, and hiring, whether it's a freelancer, whether it's a consultant, whether it's in-house, it is a little bit jarring and a little bit scary, but it is worth it if you're doing it at the right time and you're doing it in the right way. So I think that's really important. And the last thing that I loved, and I think this kind of goes both personal and business, is, working on your gross margin and your profit, and just looking at all of your expenses and saying, what is it actually costing me to run my business? Whether that's $10,000 a month, whether that's $500,000 a month, whether that's $50 a month, whatever it is, look at those actual costs and see if you're actually meeting your goals. Like, let's say you want to make $100,000 in the year and take home $100,000 as your salary. That's a lot different than maybe what you're actually like working on. Like, I think one thing that I've heard from a lot of in the photography world is like, okay, you want to make $100,000 a year, kind of backtrack on that. Like, what is that a month? What is that a day? What is that a week? And then kind of build your services out from there to meet your goals. Because like you said, like your client was undervaluing herself because she wasn't taking home as much as she should have. And so that allowed you to increase her prices and increase her profit and increase what she was actually taking home on the business or bringing to the business. And so it is really important to run your numbers and look at that, because you really don't know. You could just be undervaluing yourself or just kind of running your business, and you're never going to meet those goals unless you understand your numbers and the money that you are getting out of the business.
Right, exactly. And it's like, if you do have a specific financial goal, it's like you said, is that take home or is that gross
Yep.
revenue? And then if that's profit, is this profit after tax? You need to
Yeah.
factor in that as well, because now your top line revenue is going to be very different to what you thought it was before. And I think a lot of people, they just have like avoidance to doing that. But that avoidance means that you don't actually ever get where you want to go. The more I look at my numbers and work with my numbers, it's funny, the more money I actually make. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is a fantastic conversation. I think there's a lot of value there. If you want to get in touch with you or find you online, where can they find you?
yeah, the best way is really going to be through an experience. So in the description, there'll be a link where you can just download. It's like a free self audit of your business. So as a video training, I'll take you through how to self audit your business, and then we can stay in touch through email if you download that.
Awesome. Perfect. I will make sure to include that in the description. Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and we will see you next time on the Rest of Us podcast. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Rest of Us podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a rating or review on the podcasting platform of your choice. It really helps me see that you are enjoying the episode, and also helps other people see the podcast. Also, please consider giving a follow on social media. All the links will be in the show notes down below. Also, in the show notes, there is a link to the Rest of Us newsletter. This is a platform where I'll send out different takeaways from the episode, resources that were mentioned in the episode, and also notifications about new episodes. So make sure you click the link to subscribe there. So episodes are released weekly, and I will see you then on the next episode of the Rest of Us podcast.